Okay, so we are grateful to God that we're able to be here again tonight. We did several tests, and so we're hoping that the audio is a little better today, but we shall see. Let's bow our heads. God, we thank you and we praise you once again for allowing us this privilege and this opportunity to be here to read and to study and to share your word. We thank you because, God, you know what's in our heart. You know what we're trying to do. And God, we're going to wait on you. If it's your will, it'll get done. If not, then we're not going to fight you. God, we know our arms are way too short. So God, your will be done. Bless us now that we might grow closer to you through your holy word. Give us hearts to receive, ears to hear, and make me, God, your vessel that I decrease so that you and your word can increase in me and through me, so that these thy people can be blessed, enriched, and drawn closer to you. That's my prayer, and I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we did like eight or nine tests. So for those that are joining us and we're a part of those 8 or 9 tests, first of all, thank you for your feedback. And we're hoping that we get to the bottom of this soon. So in the meantime, again, the safest way to ensure that you can hear the word and be blessed through this ministry is to just go ahead and show up. Yeah, because at this point, the technology just doesn't seem to want to behave itself. Be that as it may, we've been looking at Exodus, right? And in particular, we were in chapter 4. It looks like verse 18 through 23. Okay, and so did we finished that, right? That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay, so and this that just a quick recap of that. So so the Lord had already spoke to Moses, told him to go to Egypt, speak to Pharaoh, have him let the people go, and when he gets there, he's going to run into some grief and woe. He's going to show him. He said, "Make sure you show him all of the miracles that I've done through you." But at the end of the day, I'm going to harden his heart, and I think that was the key in those verses that God said, "I'm going to harden his heart." He's not going to have an option. Everybody around him is going to think that something must be wrong with him because he will not relent after all these different plagues. But the Bible says that God told Moses up front. He said, "I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. I'm going to do it." And so Moses finally, if you remember, he was pushing back pretty hard, and God told him at the end of the day that he would have Aaron go with him as a mouthpiece, if you will. And so we'll pick up from verse 24, and we just want to read 3 verses here, 24 through 26. That was pretty much the did we do the whole thing?
Yeah,
we did the whole thing.
We at chapter 5 now.
Oh, we finished the whole thing. All right, I should. Yes. As I was looking at it, I was like, wow. Okay, so then we're actually going to get started in chapter 5.
Right.
All right. Well, whoever wrote this should have been better on the ball. It looks a lot like my handwriting, but God forbid I should take the blame. So we're going to start at verse 1. Exodus chapter 5, starting at verse 1. So God told, so to recap again, everything I just said, then Moses was on his way there, him and Zipporah and her their son, and God, we talked about that last week, how God wanted to kill Moses. And we spoke about that in detail. I would advise you to if you weren't here, to go back and to listen to that. It was it's important for us to understand that that God wanted to kill Moses. And we got into it in great detail and provided some clarity. And then he met up with Moses, he met up with Aaron, and now they are about to go and present themselves to Pharaoh like God instructed. So let's start at Exodus chapter 1.
Chapter 5.
Exodus chapter 5, thank you. Verse 1. And let's just read a couple of verses here.
Afterward,
And speak up, please.
Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and told Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I shall obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go."
Okay, so here's interesting, and I always I'm always just tickled in a manner of speaking at this reaction from Pharaoh. And the reason why, and it's a message for all of us, just because you don't know God don't mean that he don't know you. And just because you don't obey God doesn't mean that he won't make you obey him. The fact of the matter is Pharaoh says here very clearly that he says, "Who is the Lord that I shall obey him?" I'm Pharaoh. I'm the king. I am the head. I'm the grand wizard, the grand master. And who is this Lord that I should obey him to let Israel go? He says, "I don't know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." But God had already told Moses that God, is going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And, I'm saying that to say this. There are people today that don't believe in God, that don't believe there is a God, and that just, find us, hysterical because we spend time and try to get closer, and they don't have any regard and I'm not talking about those that, I'm talking about that don't believe that there's a God. They believe that they have control over their own lives. They believe that they, are the something of their destiny. What is that phrase? Master of their destiny and all of that type of stuff. And I understand what they're saying, and I understand why they're saying it. But they are dead wrong. The fact of the matter is that we are doing what God has already preordained us to do, and the how intimately God knows us and directs us is that He knows and has foretold every single step, every single movement. God knew that you were going to be sitting there with your arm like that. He knew that you were going to be holding your book like that. He knew that you were going to shake your head like you did a second ago. He knew that this is already preordained by God. And there are people today that don't like the fact that he has that level of charge over us. They don't like the fact that he has that level of control over us. But we are sinful by nature, which means that we are not going to do anything to seek God out. We are not going to do anything to try to offer God sacrifices of praise and thanksgiving. And our nature is corrupt. And so left to our own selves would be just like leaving a child to their own selves. They're only going to do what feels good to them, and it only feels good for the moment. And so Moses realized it. Of course, Aaron, the children of Israel, Pharaoh, he thinks that he's the what did you say? The master of his destiny. And he thinks that he is. The thing that cracks me up, just as a sidebar thing, is that Pharaoh, this Pharaoh, he is the heir of a prior Pharaoh. Do you understand what I'm saying? What happened to the prior Pharaoh? What happened to the one before that? And the one before? Yes, and right? You understand what I'm saying, right? At the end of the day, they all died. And they died just like you and me will die, and like our ancestors have died. So, how in the world you could think that you, by definition, isn't God immortal? By definition, isn't he from everlasting to everlasting? Is right? And so, once again, this is one of the reasons why folks say, oh, but Jesus died. Yeah, but Jesus is not God. Jesus, just like us, is the Son of God or a child of God, right? Fine. He's the most obedient. In fact, I could even go further and say he's the only obedient, right? He's the only one that did every single thing that his father God told him to do in the way that his father told him to do it. He might have questioned and pushed back and shared his own, not pushed back, but shared his own thoughts about it. For example, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, listen, if there's any way for me to bypass this, let it be, let it happen, but not my will, your will be done. But he actually stood by it, whereas we would have been looking at in the Garden, of Gethsemane, we would have been looking in the hedges, trying to find trying to find some way of escape. So at the end of the day, how Pharaoh could even think for a moment that he was all that is just beyond me. Except when you realize that he is being directed by Almighty God. Now, I'm saying that again, sidebar, because I've been intrigued by these select committee hearings for the January 6th insurrection. I've been intrigued by it. I've been watching them all, and I watched them all. I think I saw every single one of them, if not while it was going on. Certainly, I saw the replays, and now I'm beginning to watch them over again because I watched the last one, and then later, a couple of days later, whatever, I watched it again, and I realized I missed some stuff that it didn't register. I didn't miss it, but I didn't register. So I said, wow, there might be other stuff in the others that didn't register. So now I'm starting it all over again and watching it again. I'm just intrigued by it. The point that I'm trying to make is I see parallels in the hardening of heart. I'm not suggesting by any means that Trump is the equivalent of Pharaoh. I'm not suggesting that he, that type of parallel in the sense of, but on the other hand, I see so many comparisons. You see just in the hardening of the heart and the idea of not being able or not being willing to see the plain, and we'll see that as we continue through. We've done this before. We've looked at this before when we did the plagues. When we looked at the plagues, and we were saying, and I'd asked you to do this then, if you remember. I said, as we get ready to go into these plagues, Sister Nicole, you weren't with us back then, but when we went into it, and I'll just say it again. When we get into the plagues, I want you to think about you being Pharaoh, okay? And I want you to let me know, and y'all can do it again, is to let me know if you would have given up, and when, okay? I think there was I tried to be strong, and I don't quite remember, so we'll do it again. I don't remember where I bailed, yeah.
When I was giving up knowing what I do.
When I get there, I'll explain it better when I get there, but I'm just reminding all of us, yeah, that what I did, I tried to be strong and think like a Pharaoh and say, and all of this. And so I made it through one or two, maybe three, I don't remember, plagues before. But there was something that happened, and I was like, no mas, no more for me. I can't. But most of us, some bailed early, some bailed a little later, but none of us at that time, and of course we're just using our imagination, so it's really not good. But we all probably would have bailed after the first one, but since we're just using our imagination. But none of us, even in using our imagination, none of us held on to the end like Pharaoh. And so one therefore asks oneself, well, how is it that Pharaoh had such a hard heart, and how is it that you gotta understand God hardened his heart? And the reason why I said I see the parallel is because based on everything that we've seen and everything that we know about the election back in 2020, there was obviously some things that went on, but they were typical things that go on every election. And so, as all of the authorities have said, there was no mass corruption that would have changed the outcome of the election. And yet, it seems like, and I don't know. Again, I don't. The reason why I'm hesitant to parallel the former president with Pharaoh is because Pharaoh, I believe, was just being obstinate, and he saw, but the anger and the resentment. Well, maybe it is. The fact of the matter is that you look and you see some things, and you have the authorities that are in place, just like Pharaoh had. Pharaoh had his men, and we'll see that there came a point when his cabinet, right? When his cabinet said to him, Pharaoh, like, yeah, enough already. You gotta let these people go. Look at Egypt. And yet he maintained, but you gotta understand, it was God hardening his heart. Nobody could withstand that. I'm saying that to say, yes, God is hardening some politicians' hearts as well. And not just politicians, but there are people the average people like you and me, that still believe in the stolen election thing, that still believe, even after all of this evidence from those who they as well have voted into office, and yet their hearts are hardened. They can't see past. And I'm saying that to say that it is all God. I don't know why God does what he does. I don't know why Pharaoh would hold out this long. I do know that it wasn't him, it was God. And God takes full blame for it, full responsibility, right? He says, I blame me, because I'm the one that's hardening his heart. And I've got a reason and a purpose for it. And you don't need to understand it. You don't need to know why I'm hardening Donald Trump's heart, or his followers' hearts, or whoever. You don't need to know any of that. All you need to know is that I am the one doing it. And likewise, guess what? I've hardened your heart too. There's been things that you stood fast and dug your feet in about, and everybody was telling you, oh, no, it's not that way, it's not that. But you're like, no, I'm digging my feet and I didn't do it. And basically what you did was you said, well, what's that phrase? My mind is made up, don't confuse me with the facts. Which is what we're saying, the politicians are saying. But it's God that does that, and we don't know why. I don't know why God hardened my heart when somebody gave me some counsel and said, listen, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And I was like, no. In fact, there were times when I believed God was leading me to do some things, and after, I was like, man, did I, yeah. But my point is that it's God. So as we're reading this, I said this before, I'm saying it again, as we read this and we see the arrogance and the pompousness of Pharaoh and so on and so forth, keep in mind that it is God that will not allow him to think what I'll call rationally or objectively or whatever, okay? And why? God is the only one that knows the real reason. We speculate and we say because of this and that. But God, same thing like today. We say, well, the reason why this whole insurrection thing is, God knows the real reasons. Okay? And so just keep that in mind. And here's the thing. If you keep that in mind, then what you will, and if you apply it, listen to me carefully. If you keep that in mind and then you apply it in your own circle, because this is like the appendix to yesterday's message, the loophole in love, or the silver bullet. Yeah. If you did, then what you will realize is that when God does these things, and when the hearts are hardened, they don't know that it's God doing it. And those that know the Lord, if they are just got their feet dug in, they just don't realize. But it should make it easier for you and for me and for others to love them. That should make it easier. What are you talking about, Rev? Listen. When we find out, even in our court system today, when a person does something, a woman comes home and she slices the husband's head off and puts it in a jar along with several other parts of his body, and then the police come in and they say and they said, obviously, you go to jail. And so, what in the world were you thinking about? And she says, well, he was abusive. He did this. He did that. He did that. Well, listen. At the end of the day, when that same person goes before the judge, listen to me carefully. When that person that cut up the person, when they go before the judge, they are generally and usually found guilty. Why? Because they did commit the crime. But the explanation is applied, listen, to the sentencing. Think about it for a moment. Somebody comes and they kill up everybody, right? And then they go to court and they say, yeah, he did this, he bought this gun when he was, whatever, and he did this and so on and so forth. And then when he gets to court, the judge, the lawyers and all, they say, well, he was abused as a child. She cut up the man because these are pictures of her bruised up when he was, and so on and so on. And all of that goes to the jury. And again, like I said, generally speaking, it's like, listen, I hear you, but you still killed the guy, you still shot the people up, right? So what happens is that all of that is presented, and then at the time of sentencing, the judge says, this crime is on the books that if you commit this crime, you get 30 years in jail. However, because you showed, and he's not saying this, but this is what happened. Because I saw the pictures of her bloody nose and her busted head, from 2 months earlier. I see that they was abused as a child, and I see this and that. So I'm going to take that in consideration. So instead of giving them 30 years, I'll give them 25 years or whatever it is. But do you see what I'm trying to say? So likewise, he says, the judge does that because he says, I realize that some of this was because of your environment and whatever. What I'm saying to you as men and women, brothers and sisters in the church, is that the same concept that applies to us, in the sense that when a brother or a sister, again, we're not talking about the world, this, like I said, this is appendix to yesterday's message. When a brother or a sister does some craziness and says some craziness and whatever else, the fact of the matter is that that, listen, they clearly, God, because it's clear that they should have went left and they went right, and everybody was telling them don't go right, go left, but they went, and so clearly God hardened their heart. God obviously has a plan. Listen, all I'm doing is taking that under consideration when I keep my distance. This is why I keep my distance, and this is why I avoid, and so on and so forth. But it's also the reason why I can still love. Because I realize this is not them. This is God's plan, and why he's going this way with them, and so on and so forth. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I'm going to trust God that he knows what he's doing. and yet I'm going to keep my distance. Do you follow? So having said that, Pharaoh right away says, who is the Lord that I shall obey? So what happens in verse 3? Anybody, please.
So they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please, let us go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword.
So that was their response, right? And what is also interesting here is that what they say to Pharaoh is what? God told us met us and told us that that you should let us go. But what do they say to Pharaoh? They say, let us go 3 days journey. What does that say? It kind of suggests that they're going and coming back. It kind of sounds like they are going to go and a 3 days journey and do whatever isn't that what he said? To do sacrifices and stuff to the Lord in order to appease God so that he doesn't strike them with sickness and disease or being killed off.
Verse 4.
No, hold on. I was just taking a breath. Sorry. So they say to Pharaoh, let us go 3 days, a 3 days journey. So you said it sounded like they're coming back. Is it possible that they would be coming back? Let me scratch that. Let me just make a statement. It's interesting that, and we will never know, but who knows? If Pharaoh had let him go at that point, maybe it would have been that God would have brought them back. And in other words, if Pharaoh would have let him go, if the 3 days in that 3 days period, God just certainly changed the heart and mind of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. So they may well have come back to a free land. You know what I'm trying to say? To freedom with less of a harsh slavery type of relationship with the Egyptians. But Pharaoh didn't. So it didn't really matter what. It didn't really matter what Moses was requesting in terms of time. He could have just easily said, "We want to go for a day or for a couple of hours." Pharaoh had already his heart was hard. Okay. But it's just interesting that he does say, let us go 3 days journey into the desert and sacrifice to the Lord. It does sound like, he's saying, okay, well, we'll go 3 days and we'll be back after that. And as we continue to read, we may find some hints that even, support that thought even more.
Because what I was going to ask is that what Moses walked away with, thinking this is what God told him?
No. Because we read earlier where God told him, you're going to bring my people back to this mountain. So remember when the early part, when God first commissioned Moses? Does anybody remember where God first met Moses at the burning bush? And he told him, he says, as proof that I have, ordained you to do this, you'll come back here with the children of Israel and you'll worship me on this mountain.
Was that in Midian?
It wasn't far from it. It wasn't far from it. That's where he was. He had taken the sheep to the mountain. But I think on the map, I can't remember now. But the land has changed now anyway. The name has changed. So, but it was not far. It was near 50 miles. Okay, so he says, let me go. So now verse 4.
Then the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor. And Pharaoh said, look, The people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor. So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, you shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves, and you shall lay on them the quota of bricks which they made before. You shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, let us go and worship to our God. Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words.
Okay. So what is Pharaoh's response to the request of a three-day journey into the wilderness? It's even right, really, far more. It's like it wasn't just a no. Yeah, way over the edge. It's like way over the edge. It's like such an extreme response to a simple request of a 3-day journey, right? And so again, why did he go so ballistic on it? This is right. This is what happened. Again, I guess I do want to keep trying to parallel with what's going on today. Is that just keep in mind that God still hardens hearts today. And as we see in government, like I said, you have people that were talking about today. You have people that were in the congressmen and so on that were in the Capitol when it was attacked. You had congressmen and women from both sides, the Republican and Democrat side, both sides, and they were all fearful for their lives. And you would think that that would be enough, that everybody, once it was all over, everybody would be on one accord and say, listen, let's do. But it's not the case. Their hearts were, yeah, exactly. When the situation had ended, hearts regained their hardness, rehardened, if you will, right? Okay. And so the same thing here, Pharaoh's heart, he goes ballistic and he goes irrational and way over the edge because his heart was hard. And now he's taking it out on there's another passage of scripture that we read when we were reading in the book of Esther. If you remember, there was this guy named Haman who was enraged because this guy Mordecai wouldn't bow to him and so he got so angry and so enraged that he decided he was going to kill off all of the Jews everywhere. And so you should read that sometime to refresh your memory. But it's like they just snap and they just go. So Pharaoh in the same case, and when I say snap, not snap like where they go postal, they just snap and they start making such irrational decisions that clearly one would argue if they were in their right minds they wouldn't make. But it's not that they're not in their right minds. It's not that it's that their hearts have been hardened by God. All right. Okay. And so, by the way, so when we say that their hearts were hardened by God, understand something. The act of the order, yes, thank you. The order for their heart to be hardened was given by God. The hardening of it was done by his imp, Satan. Did y'all get that? Because Satan doesn't make any orders. He thinks he's making orders, and he tries to make people think that he's making orders. But he follows the instructions of the Lord. If you remember, the Bible tells us about Job. He says to Job, God says to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Well, think of it in that way. God says, Satan, go mess with Pharaoh. And when God said, go mess with, and I'm, of course, making this up. But when God said, "Go mess with Pharaoh," Satan didn't like walk and he was like, no problem. You see what I'm saying? So Satan does the hardening and what you know what I mean. What he does makes him irrational or whatever. But the order came from God, and that's why we maintain that Satan has no power. Satan has no power. But hopefully I keep saying that long enough. Spirits. Where are we?
10.
Verse 10. Okay.
And the taskmasters of the people and their officers went out and spoke to the people, saying, "Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go, get yourself straw where you can find it. Yet none of your work will be reduced."
Okay, so they go out. Pharaoh gives them the instruction, and the taskmasters and the officers they go out and they let the people know from now on we're not gonna provide you with straw. You got to find your own straw, but you also got to keep up the production. It said, pick up from verse 12. Summary.
So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, "Fulfill your work, your daily quota, as when there was straw." Also, excuse me. Also, the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, "Why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick, both yesterday and today as before?"
Okay, so here's the interesting and important thing to realize. The fact is that back in verse 6, it says that same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers and told them to go and tell the people this, that they would What we see now a lot clearer is that the taskmasters were
Slaves.
uh,
The taskmasters, were they slaves also?
no, not the taskmasters. The taskmasters were Egyptians.
Okay.
But the officers,
they
were slaves also, but they were they were like supervisors of the other slaves, right? And I could only imagine that at some point prior to all of this, they kind of felt like they were living a good life. Mm-hmm. I imagine that as supervisors, because remember, why would they, we spoke about this before. Why did the Egyptians make some of the children of Israel officers? I'll give you a hint. Go back to Exodus chapter 1. And
so they could ease into the servitude.
Yep. Genesis chapter 1.
So they could ease the.
Are you reading? Genesis. I'm saying Genesis. Am I saying Genesis chapter? Exodus chapter 1. And if you read, where is it? Verse 9. Start at verse 9. Sister Nicole.
And he said to his people.
This is Pharaoh saying to his people.
Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we.
Are what?
More and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happened in the event of war, they also join our enemies and fight against us. And so go up out of the land.
Okay. So why did they employ Israelites? Why did they employ Israelites?
Because they were multiplying so quickly.
Yeah.
And so if he took some of them and made them officers, whatever, if they rose up against the people, maybe he figured that they would defend,
Why?
but not because he gave them certain privileges
Exactly
and
right.
things, so they're not going to go up against him.
Exactly right. You see, the idea was twofold. The first fold was that they were outnumbered anyway, so they didn't have enough Egyptians to oversee all of those Jews. So what they do is they raise up like back in slavery days where they had the house slaves who may have thought that they were in a better position, and in a manner of speaking, they were comparatively.
They got a few little amenities.
Right, a couple like they get to but the amenity is that they get to sleep under the house instead of out in the fields in the rain, or that they get to eat the scraps from the table as opposed to the scraps from the garbage can or something like that. So whatever it was, it was still horrible and terrible. And listen, and upon reflection, you say, well, that was but in that situation, so these officers, I'm sure that these Jewish officers, any supervisor, I'm sure if I ask any of you about your supervisor and ask you, who did more work, you or your supervisor, I'm sure all of you will say you did, right? The fact of the matter is that as you move up the chain of command, you do less and less physical work, right? Generally speaking, you do less and less physical work. And so as they made me an officer, as Pharaoh made me an officer, what my job becomes now is to make sure y'all do your job. Well, I can't make sure you're doing your job if I'm doing it with you. Like, I can't dig a hole and then make sure that y'all are digging too. I gotta walk around, right? And I gotta walk back and forth, and while y'all are, and I've got to yell at y'all, and whatever else, however discipline worked back then. Yeah, I've got to do all those things, and my motivation is what?
To please Pharaoh, to make sure that work is getting done.
Yeah, a little less than that.
To keep your status as officer.
Right, and how do I do that? That's what I'm saying. I mean, yes, you're right, to please Pharaoh, but Pharaoh is back at the at the palace. So, but what I was getting at is to please the taskmaster. Right? I care about the one that's directly supervised, right? Just like they care about the ones that's, whoever's under them cares about them. So my job as an officer, as a Jewish officer, is to keep my taskmaster, to keep him happy. So if he says they don't get no more straw, and they still have to keep. I'm gonna tell them, look, no, I don't want to hear nothing. Y'all get out there, get up earlier, then go out, right? Because I want him, my taskmaster. Of course, it rolls up, but I want my taskmaster to see that I'm doing my job. In this particular case, though, it was such an overwhelming task, a virtually impossible task, because remember, it wasn't, and this goes back to the irrationality of Pharaoh. He's saying we're not going to give them straw anymore, but they have to maintain the same numbers. That was going to be virtually impossible. Up to now, being an officer, and I'm jumping back and forth, but up to now, being an officer was a better position, maybe not cushy, but it was a better position than being, in the rank and file. But now that he's saying there's no more straw, what happens when, what we read it, I believe, right? What happens when they cut off the straw?
The children of Israel have the children of Israel had to find it.
Right, and what happened?
They did.
Well,
They found stubble.
yeah,
and they were beat.
but why were they beaten? Well, it wasn't them that was beaten, but we'll come back. But
they weren't keeping up their
quota, right? So then, what you said earlier, they didn't do it. They couldn't because there wasn't enough stubble. Nor could they get it quick enough. Nor could they do what they had to do fast enough to keep up the quota, right? So yeah, they tried to make the best of what they could, but they could. At the end of the day, they couldn't. It was just impossible to do. So what happens? Where did we stop?
We have the 15, verse 15.
Okay, so then what happened then? Verse 13 says, the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, fulfill your work and your daily quotas as when you had struck. Also, the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, what happened to them?
Yeah, they were beat.
They were beaten, right? And were asked, why haven't you been able, right? Again, they know why. It's just inconceivable to think that we would be able to do, right? But the fact is, being an officer now turned out to not to be as great a position as they had thought. Right? Okay, so that what happens? Verse 15. This is Tina.
Then the officers of the children of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh.
So they go over the taskmaster's head, so to speak, right? They bypass the taskmasters and go straight to Pharaoh, and they say what?
Why are you dealing thus with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants, and they say to us, make brick. And indeed your servants are beaten, but the fault is in your own people.
Now notice he says the fault is in your own people, as if they didn't know that the order came from Pharaoh, but they ain't going to say it's your fault, Pharaoh. No, it's your people's fault. They don't give a straw. What does Pharaoh say?
But he said, you are idle, idle. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.
See, that's fine. I just tend to be more theatrical, and I read it kind of like, they said, there's no straw, your people, indeed your servants beaten, but it's the fault of your people. And Pharaoh says, you are idle, idle. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Just for the sake of effect. The point being that Pharaoh is mocking them, right? He knows good and well that they won't be able to keep up the numbers. But what is Pharaoh's motivation? I'll give you a hint, even though you might already know. But what is motivation here? And I will say it's the same motivation that caused him, or them, Pharaohs, to promote the people to the officer's position.
Something different. I was thinking more along to make them lose hope.
To make them lose hope is a big part of it, yeah.
But sort of keep them, what's the word? Because there was a lot of them.
Yes.
And so to try to keep them.
See, you're going like this, but it's
control.
just the opposite. Oh, under his control, but it's just the opposite of this. He's trying to keep them divided. Remember, that was the purpose of promoting the officers, right? Pharaoh, I don't have enough men. Egyptians, to do. So I've got to cause division amongst the rank and file. And the best way to cause division amongst the rank and file is to make some, Say it again, Sister Pat.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about what I was saying. So they promote them so that they will be in conflict with each other.
Right, exactly. And that was the goal, to keep control over them. And God put this in my spirit earlier, and then I did just let it go. But But that sounds familiar to another situation. Sister Beverly, you know what I'm talking about? I'm not talking about I'm not talking about in today's world. I'm talking about scripturally. The same concept happens over and over, but it happens again in a very, very similar way. Except, okay, I'll give this one away too. Except it wasn't Pharaoh, it was Caesar, and it wasn't the Egyptian officers, it was the Pharisees, absolutely. The Pharisees and the Sadducees and those guys. If you remember, in Jesus' day, right, the same concept was going on. Caesar didn't care nothing about the Jews and it wasn't quite as harsh as what we're reading here. But Caesar didn't care nothing about the Jews. He just wanted peace and order. Rome just wanted, to be worshipped as, the greatest in the world, and that was that. No disruptions, no insurrections, that type of thing, right? And so, though, unlike in this particular case that we're reading, we don't see scripturally where Caesar picked these Pharisees, but ultimately the concept worked out the same. What we do know is that at some point, Pontius Pilate, the governor, who was governor, and that level of people, they said, look, I'm oversimplifying, but basically they said, look, Jews, look, those are the Jews. What's their story? Well, their story is that they believe in God and they follow God. All right, so is that their number one thing? Yes. Okay, then who is in charge of communicating to their God? Oh, the church, the Pharisees, the synagogues, those that are in the temple. Okay, so who are the leaders of the temple? The high priest, the chief priest. Okay, so those are the ones, Pilate speaking. Those are the ones I want to talk to. And he goes to Pilate goes to the chief priests and the Pharisees and says, listen, all we want your people to do is two things. One is, that's all I'm saying. And that is number one. Pay your taxes. Right. We want you to pay your taxes, but we want you to do one other thing too. And that is to just keep no insurrections, no insurrections, no rebellions against Caesar, stuff like that. If you guys will handle that, then we will leave you alone. You can worship all the God you want to, even you do all of the preaching and singing and whatever else y'all want to do. But all you have to do is just don't cause no trouble and pay your taxes. Right? And so when Jesus came along, and I shouldn't have jumped that fast, that quick. So the chief priests and Pharaoh and all of those guys, they did just that. They kept the people. And what did they tell the people about Rome? What did Pharaoh and those guys, the chief priests, what did they teach, preach, tell the people about Rome? They told them that Rome was basically the devil. He's the man.
Yeah.
Right? He's the man. He's got his foot on our back, but our God is gonna deliver us one day. Rome and Caesar, they are no good. They're just a bunch of godless people whose souls will burn in hell. And our God will deliver us. He's gonna send the Messiah one day. Well, why did they say that? Well, first of all, they didn't believe it. And number two is that was how they managed the people. They couldn't very well say Caesar is a good guy and just get with the program because they would rebel against him. Are y'all getting this? Like the Pharisees and those guys, and by the way, the Pharisees and Pilate and those guys, they had an understanding too. Fine, Pilate speaking. Fine, blame me. Say you hate us and whatever. Just say whatever. I don't care, but don't let nothing break out. Don't let nothing. Don't let nothing, kick off. And so the people ended up rallying around the church with the belief that with the belief that God was going to deliver them through the hand of the Messiah, whom the Pharisees were just kind of making up because they really wasn't like believing it. They just wanted to maintain their positions. And they knew that as long as they kept the people, at bay, they would keep their positions just like we're reading now. The problem was that in those days, Jesus came along. In these days, Moses came along. And just like Moses, or just like Jesus, I should say, when Moses came along, when Jesus came along, he began to disrupt the apple cart. I'm going with all of these old, what do they call cliches? Upset the apple cart. You ever heard that expression? And Moses did the same thing. He came and he upset the apple cart. The officers back then had the people, the Egyptians, man, they're no good. But you know what? We got to do our work, so let's just do it, right? Just trying to keep their position. Moses comes and disrupts the apple cart. Jesus comes and disrupts the apple cart, which is why, going back to Jesus, why the Pharisees made this plot to have him killed. You remember we read it, right? And we'll be coming to it. I think we already did it just recently, not long ago, where they said, we got to do something about this Jesus guy, or else we'll lose our position. Remember? So it was the same exact thing. These officers, though, they didn't get a chance to come together and say, we got to do something. Because this order came down from Pharaoh and said, no more straw. So the officers were just out there and they paid the price. They were the ones that were being beaten and whipped and required to come up with the same volume of bricks that they had before. So where are we?
17. I was in the middle of 17.
Okay, so read 17 already.
But he said, you are idle. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.
Right.
Therefore go now and work. For no straw shall be given you, yet you shall deliver the quota of bricks. And the officers of the children of Israel saw that they were in trouble after it was said, you shall not reduce any bricks from your daily quota.
Okay, so what happens? Verse 20.
Then, as they came out from Pharaoh,
So as these officers left Pharaoh,
they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them.
okay, now just stop right there, because think of this, right? So the officers just were beaten. They went over the taskmaster said, they went to Pharaoh. They pleaded their case to Pharaoh. Pharaoh told them too bad. And so now they're leaving Pharaoh's office and they're headed back to camp, to the Israelite camp. And they went into Moses and Aaron. And so at this point, what do you think they're feeling?
Not like running into Moses and Aaron.
Well, yeah, probably just like running into Moses and Aaron, but not for good purpose, right? What do you think?
They're angry, they're upset, they're going down, and Moses is the cause.
And say it again. They're angry, upset,
And Moses is the cause.
and they're blaming Moses for it, right? Right? Now, what's the reality? God is the cause. And what are they angry about? They're angry. Go ahead.
They're angry that he just won't listen. Pharaoh won't.
Oh, right. But now they've already spoke to Pharaoh, and
Right.
and therefore on their way to meet, they see Moses. They realize that God.
They're realizing that they think that they're losing hope that God even sent Moses, and they're thinking that Moses caused all this trouble for them.
They're thinking that Moses caused all this trouble for them. But the reality is that the trouble and the pain and the anguish that they are experiencing, listen, is the beginning of their deliverance, right? It's the beginning of their deliverance. So listen. So when they were like months before Moses came to them, right? Were they slaves? Absolutely. And were they unhappy slaves or were they happy slaves? Say it again. It's not funny. Say it again.
No, you can't say that the same thing.
There's no such thing as a happy slave. Right? I don't care what you say, there's no such thing as a happy slave, right? And if you want to massage it and say, well, maybe not happy but content or whatever, no, there's none of those words you put in the same sentence with slave. None of them, right? None of them equate. So at the end of the day, you have these angry slaves, angrier because they think Moses made their job and made their life even worse. But the reality is that this is the beginning of God's deliverance for those people. Right?
Would you also say that God delivers the brokenhearted and that maybe they had to go through this so they would be delivered?
Say it again.
Like God delivers the brokenhearted, and
Go ahead.
so I'm gonna stop there.
Okay. The answer is you could say that, but it wouldn't be accurate. Because it suggests that if you're brokenhearted, God will deliver you. And though that sounds nice and it sounds,
It's not always so.
No, it's not always so. Why?
Because there are people who don't deserve to be delivered and they're brokenhearted and
Okay, I'm okay with that. I would have said it a little differently, but I'm okay with that. Yeah, not that they don't deserve, because none of us deserve. But I would have said it more like there are those who deliverance is not part of the plan for their life. And that's not just say see, this is why, again, I have to fist fight some of my brothers and sisters in the ministry, because we tend to think that God is going to deliver all of us by making whatever is troubling us go away, or making whatever is troubling us, ease, but there are some folks that the deliverance, listen, there are some folks whose deliverance is death, literal dying. Do you see that? And there, oh my goodness, would I have to fist fight some of the brothers and sisters in the ministry about saying that, but it's the truth nonetheless. It's the truth anyhow. There are some people, and quite frankly, if we are honest with ourselves, when we look back, we say to ourselves, you know what? I'm grateful that deliverance came through death for some people that I know. Because my cousin, my uncle, my aunt, my sister, my friend, my mother, they were suffering in whatever it was that they were dealing with. So for them to have, and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed all night long. And I wanted them to get better because I wanted them to get better, so I could talk to them and go to barbecues and stuff. But you know what? When they left this earth, when God finally called them home, it was deliverance. It was deliverance for them. They were no longer in that situation anymore. And that it was deliverance for me, because the burden, I knew that now the flesh had gone, and I knew that they were no longer in that same situation. That God had delivered them, and if they were saved, of course, He's in God's hand. They're in God's hands. But we like to think of deliverance as being, I got a broken arm, the arm is healed. I got no money, I get some money. I got, whatever it is, and but not all deliverance comes in that way. And so the children of Israel are angry and they're mad because they think they are now beginning to think that they were better off as slaves with straw, because that's what they did. Well, let's read it. Where did we stop?
21.
We stopped at, we read 20. So read 20 and 21.
Then, as they came out from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. And they said to them, let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us.
So they're angry and they're mad at Moses, but because they have to direct their anger at somebody, but it's really God, and that they're mad at though they won't say it, number one. But number two is they don't realize that this is the beginning of deliverance for them. I'm saying that to say because sometimes it's hard to tell the two apart. Sometimes torture seems like just torture. It seems like when we have trouble or heartache or problems, that it is, the beginning of sorrows. But we see that in God's infinite wisdom, the beginning of their deliverance was torture and suffering and things getting worse. It is, if you think and look over your life, we're going to stop here. We'll stop here. If you,
Well, it's two.
oh, yes, just a couple more verses. So let's go ahead and finish. But if you think about it, the fact of the matter is that, when we think back over our own lives and things that, the fact is that some of the worst times, at least in my life, when I was delivered, I realized that it wasn't until I didn't acknowledge it as deliverance until I was delivered. But once I was delivered and I look back, I said, you know what? That was the beginning of my deliverance. Let me give you an example. You may have, it's a silly example, I'm just making it up, but you may have gotten a job and you really loved your job and thought it was great and wonderful and fantastic. And then, things just took a southward turn, and you hated the job and da 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 da. And at some point down the road, God placed you in a position, even on the same job. A better example, on your job, there was somebody that you just didn't get along with, and whatever. And so it was just horrible, and the relationship and the atmosphere and all that, and it was horrible. And you thought it would, and so you went through all of that, and at some point God delivered you. And at the point of deliverance, it might have been in the same job or you got a different job or whatever, but at the point of deliverance, you and the person that you had the problem with become good friends. And you thought, wow, and you say to one another, in fact, I hated you when I first met you. I thought that you were this and I thought you were that. I didn't realize that all of that was just me thinking that God was burdening me with this situation and with this job and so. But now that I've been through it, now I understand some things. And now I see some things differently. And now do you follow what I'm saying? So very often we don't understand that. But at the end of the day, our deliverance is not always, our deliverance doesn't start once we're delivered. It's the process. Yeah. Okay, so let's read the last couple of verses, starting at verse 22.
So Moses returned to the Lord and said, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all.
Okay, and so what do we see here? we see that. Say it again.
Moses is angry too.
Even Moses, exactly. Even Moses is angry. He's and what does he say? What's the last thing he said there?
You haven't delivered your people at all.
You haven't delivered your people at all. What do you think he's saying in his self, within himself?
And that they're not going to get to no promised land.
Right, all of that. But what else?
Could it be that he's failed?
Well, yeah, that's possible, but I don't think at this point he's feeling like that.
And now they blame me.
Now they're blaming me, yes, and
I wish you never had picked me.
kind of. I wish you never had picked me.
Why you could just leave me alone?
You said, why couldn't he just leave me alone? What'd you say, Sister Pat?
I didn't want to go anyway.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go anyway, which translate to nobody. God, didn't I tell you? Right? Lord, didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you, Lord, that this was gonna end badly? Lord, I don't know, listen to me. Lord, I don't know why you didn't listen to me, why you didn't take my advice. God, if you would have only listened to me back at Mount, he's laughing. Why are you laughing, Sister Nicole?
No, it just said well, it's just said from my perspective now that I know about God and that he doesn't fail, it's like, you know.
It's funny, yes, it's funny. But when you're in the situation, and I would suggest that many of us have been in that very same situation, it's like, God, like, didn't I tell you I didn't want to do this? Why would you? And because you didn't listen, God, because you didn't listen to me. Now look. Yeah. Lord, this wouldn't have happened if you would have only. See, this is why I get upset with you, God, because I'm trying to tell you. I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to help you, Lord. I'm trying to, and you just won't listen to me. And I imagine that Moses felt something in that way at this time, because the only thing that would be rolling around in my mind is, like somebody said, I didn't want to come here in the first place. And now things have gotten, so Moses doesn't even see that this is the beginning of their deliverance. And you would think that God, in his infinite power, but also being who he is, that he would be like, you know what, right? And send lightning bolts and kill up everybody, right? But no, you're absolutely right. The fact of the matter is, because he's so loving, he looks past all of that. And so, even though the interesting thing, and then we'll pray, is that even though we know the end of the story, as we read it, it still is, it still never gets old, it never gets stale. And so,
Just a thought I was having is that when you said he could have just sent a lightning bolt or whatever and killed them all off, well, in the same vein, he could have just freed them. He didn't have to have this whole thing with, so, right. It didn't even have to deal with Pharaoh or anything.
Right.
But he did it, I guess, because it's a lesson, it's something for them to have gone through and seen and learned from. He wants them to get something, he's striving for them to get out of this old, I'm talking general.
Yes, I understand. But let me ask you this.
It didn't have to even be going through all this.
You're absolutely right. So let me challenge you with this question. What if you get to heaven and we're sitting around God's throne and somebody says, Lord, just out of curiosity, what in the world was all of that about? I mean, like, why did you even bother with Pharaoh and the whole Exodus thing? Like, you didn't even have to do that. The people could have just been free from the beginning. And what if God's response was, yeah, I know, I just felt like doing it? How many of you would then say, then I don't want to be here, and that ain't right, so I don't want to?
Not.
I'll be quiet like a mouse.
Right, exactly. The reason why I'm saying that is because I don't need, and I encourage you not to need a rational explanation. I'm okay if God says, I thought it was a hoot, quite frankly. I thought it would be funny. You know what? I'm good with that. Whatever, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because what happens is, and too often we preachers try to provide answers for things that God does, and in his infinite wisdom, there are some things that are inexplicable. Right? And so I just say, like I said, like if God said, yeah, I know I could have done that, but yeah, I had some time. I just figured, what the heck? Let's see what happens. Is it like I'm gonna say, God, that you need to have a better answer than that, because that don't cut it for me.
And then we'll see with the lightning hit.
Yeah. So right. So I'm saying that to say that when you what'd you say, Sister Pat?
You don't always need an answer.
Right.
I'm up there, I'm again